The desert wind whipped sand across Sarah Martinez's face as she crouched behind the concrete barrier, her medical bag clutched tightly in her trembling hands. The sound of gunfire echoed through the abandoned village, each shot making her heart pound faster against her ribs. She had volunteered for this medical mission to Afghanistan, but nothing in her nursing training had prepared her for the chaos of active combat. Sarah was part of a humanitarian medical team that had been providing aid to remote villages when their convoy was ambushed. Most of her team had been evacuated to safety, but she had stayed behind when she heard there were wounded soldiers who needed immediate medical attention. Her supervisor had ordered her to leave, but Sarah couldn't abandon people who were bleeding and dying. The radio crackled to life beside her. "This is Commander Jake Sullivan, Navy SEAL Team 6. We have multiple wounded. Request immediate medical assistance. Coordinates follow." Sarah's hands shook as she grabbed the radio. She had basic field medic training, but she was just a civilian nurse from Seattle. Still, she couldn't ignore the desperation in the commander's voice. "This is Sarah Martinez, registered nurse with Medical Aid International. I'm approximately 200 meters from your position. What's your status?" There was a pause, then the commander's voice came back, strained with pain. "Martinez, you need to get out of here. This is a hot zone. We've got insurgents on 3 sides." "How many wounded do you have?" Sarah asked, already checking her supplies. She had morphine, bandages, and basic surgical equipment. It would have to be enough. "3 men down. 1 critical. I'm hit but mobile." Commander Sullivan's voice was getting weaker. "Martinez, I'm ordering you to evacuate immediately." Sarah took a deep breath and made a decision that would change her life forever. "With respect, Commander, you're not my commanding officer. I'm coming to you." Before he could protest, Sarah grabbed her medical bag and started moving toward the coordinates he had given. She stayed low, using abandoned cars and rubble for cover. The sound of gunfire was getting closer, and she could see muzzle flashes in the distance. When she reached the building where the SEALs had taken shelter, she found Commander Jake Sullivan pressed against a wall, blood seeping through his tactical vest. Even wounded and covered in dust, she could see he was a commanding presence. His dark eyes were alert despite the pain, and he immediately tried to stand when he saw her. "You shouldn't be here," he said through gritted teeth. "It's too dangerous for a civilian." Sarah ignored his protest and knelt beside him, quickly assessing his wounds. He had been shot in the shoulder, and blood was flowing steadily. "Where are your other men?" she asked, already working to stop the bleeding. Jake pointed toward the back of the building. "Rodriguez has a chest wound. Martinez and Thompson are with him. Thompson caught shrapnel in his legs." Sarah worked quickly to bandage Jake's shoulder. Her hands were steady now that she had a job to do. "Can you move?" "Yeah, but Rodriguez can't. He's unconscious and losing blood fast." Without hesitation, Sarah grabbed her bag and headed toward the back of the building. She found the 3 SEALs in a small room. Rodriguez was indeed unconscious, his breathing shallow and rapid. Thompson was alert but pale, his legs badly injured from shrapnel. Martinez, the 3rd SEAL, was trying to apply pressure to Rodriguez's chest wound while monitoring Thompson. "I'm Sarah. I'm a nurse," she announced as she dropped to her knees beside Rodriguez. The chest wound was severe, and she could see he had lost a lot of blood. She immediately started an IV line and began administering fluids. "You need to get him to a hospital," she told Jake, who had followed her despite his own injury. "He's going into shock." "Choppers can't land with all this enemy fire," Jake replied. "We're pinned down until backup arrives." Sarah looked around the room. These brave men had been protecting her medical convoy, and now they were trapped because of the ambush. She made another life-changing decision. "Then I'll keep him alive until they can." For the next 3 hours, Sarah worked tirelessly to stabilize Rodriguez while treating Thompson's shrapnel wounds and monitoring Jake's condition. She used every skill she had learned in nursing school and more that she improvised on the spot. When Rodriguez's blood pressure dropped dangerously low, she administered medication. When Thompson's pain became unbearable, she gave him morphine while keeping him conscious so she could monitor for signs of internal bleeding. All the while, the firefight continued around them. Jake and Martinez took turns returning fire while Sarah worked. The building shook from explosions, and dust fell from the ceiling with each impact. Sarah tried to ignore the fear that gnawed at her stomach and focus on her patients. "Talk to me, Rodriguez," she whispered as she checked his pulse again. "Stay with me." Jake watched her work with growing admiration. Here was a civilian nurse, probably in her first combat situation, and she was calmer under fire than some soldiers he had served with. Her small hands moved with precision and confidence as she managed 3 wounded men simultaneously. "Where did you learn to do this?" Jake asked during a brief lull in the fighting. "Emergency room in Seattle," Sarah replied without looking up from her work. "Saturday nights can be pretty intense." Despite the circumstances, Jake found himself smiling. This woman had risked her life to help strangers, and she was making jokes while bullets flew overhead. As the sun began to set, they finally heard the sound of approaching helicopters. Jake grabbed his radio. "This is Commander Sullivan. We have 3 wounded, 1 critical. Female civilian medic on site has been providing treatment." The evacuation was swift but chaotic. Sarah insisted on staying with Rodriguez during the helicopter ride to the field hospital, continuing to monitor his vital signs and administer medication. Her clothes were covered in blood, and she was exhausted, but she never left his side. At the field hospital, Sarah finally allowed herself to collapse into a chair as the doctors took over Rodriguez's care. Her hands were shaking again now that the adrenaline was wearing off. Jake, his shoulder properly bandaged, sat down beside her. "Rodriguez is going to make it because of you," he said quietly. Sarah looked at him with tired eyes. "Is that his first name or last name? I've been calling him Rodriguez for hours, and I don't even know his first name. Miguel Rodriguez. He's got a wife and 2 little girls back home." Jake's voice was soft. "They'll get to see him again because of what you did today." Tears finally came to Sarah's eyes. The magnitude of what had happened was beginning to sink in. She had saved a man's life, possibly 3 lives. But more than that, she had discovered something about herself that she never knew existed. Under pressure, when it mattered most, she had been brave. Jake watched her cry and felt something stir in his chest that he had never experienced before. He had served with courage and seen bravery countless times, but what this woman had done was different. She had no training for combat, no obligation to help them, and every reason to save herself. Yet she had risked everything for strangers. "What's your full name?" Jake asked. "Sarah Elizabeth Martinez," she replied, wiping her eyes. "Sarah Elizabeth Martinez," Jake repeated slowly, as if committing it to memory. "I owe you a debt I can never repay." Sarah looked at him and saw something in his dark eyes that made her heart skip. "You don't owe me anything. This is what anyone would have done." Jake shook his head. "No, it's not. What you did today, that was extraordinary." Before Sarah could respond, a doctor approached them. "Ms. Martinez? I'm Dr. Peterson. I wanted to thank you personally. Your field treatment of Sergeant Rodriguez was exceptional. You quite literally saved his life." Sarah felt a warm glow of pride mixed with relief. "He's going to be okay?" "He's stable and should make a full recovery. His family will have you to thank for that." As Dr. Peterson walked away, Jake turned to Sarah. "When does your medical mission end?" "In 3 weeks. Then I go back to Seattle." Jake nodded, but something in his expression suggested he was already thinking about those 3 weeks and what would happen after. "Would you like to grab some coffee? I mean, whatever passes for coffee around here." Sarah smiled for the first time since the ambush began. Despite everything they had been through, or maybe because of it, she found herself drawn to this quiet, intense man who had put his life on the line to protect her convoy. "I'd like that." As they walked toward the mess tent together, neither of them realized that their lives had just become intertwined in ways they couldn't imagine. The desert wind still carried the sound of distant gunfire, but for the first time in hours, Sarah felt safe. Walking beside Jake, she felt like she had found something she didn't know she was looking for. The coffee was indeed terrible, but they sat together for 2 hours talking about everything and nothing. Jake told her about growing up in Montana, about choosing the SEALs over college, about the responsibility he felt for his men. Sarah shared stories about nursing school, about her family in California, about why she had volunteered for the medical mission in the first place. "I wanted to make a difference," she said. "Back home, I feel like I'm just one more nurse in a big hospital. Here, every life I help save feels like it matters more." Jake understood that feeling. "It's the same reason I became a SEAL. I wanted to know that what I did mattered." As the night grew late, they both knew their time was limited. Jake would be reassigned to a new mission soon, and Sarah would continue with her medical work. But something had been established between them that neither could ignore. "Sarah," Jake said as they prepared to part ways, "I know this is crazy, and I know we just met under the worst possible circumstances, but I'd like to see you again, while you're still here." Sarah felt her heart flutter. She had never been attracted to military men before. Her previous relationships had been with doctors or other professionals from her safe, predictable world back home. But Jake was different. There was a depth to him, a quiet strength that had nothing to do with his physical capabilities and everything to do with his character. "I'd like that too," she said softly. Jake smiled, and Sarah noticed how it transformed his entire face. The serious, intense commander disappeared, replaced by a man who looked young and hopeful. "Tomorrow night?" he asked. "There's supposed to be a USO show, not exactly dinner and a movie, but—" "It sounds perfect," Sarah replied. As she walked back to her quarters, Sarah couldn't stop thinking about Jake's eyes and the way he had looked at her when he said her name. She had come to Afghanistan to help people and make a difference. She never expected to meet someone who would make such a difference in her life. That night, as she lay in her narrow bunk, listening to the sounds of the military base settling down for the night, Sarah replayed the events of the day. She thought about the fear, the adrenaline, the satisfaction of saving lives. But mostly she thought about Jake Sullivan and the way her heart had raced when he smiled at her. She had no idea that Jake was lying awake in his quarters thinking the same things about her. He had served multiple tours of duty and had seen countless acts of bravery, but he had never met anyone like Sarah Martinez. She was brave without being reckless, strong without being hard, and beautiful in a way that had nothing to do with her appearance and everything to do with the light in her eyes when she talked about helping people. Both of them fell asleep that night with smiles on their faces, neither knowing that their chance meeting under fire would lead to a love story that would span continents and years, surviving deployments and distance, ultimately ending at an altar where Jake would promise to love and protect Sarah for the rest of their lives. The USO show was everything Jake had promised, and nothing like Sarah had expected. She sat on a folding chair in a tent filled with soldiers, watching a comedian from Los Angeles try to make jokes about military life. Jake sat beside her, close enough that she could smell his aftershave and feel the warmth radiating from his body. Despite the strange setting, Sarah found herself laughing more than she had in months. "This is definitely not dinner and a movie," she whispered to Jake during a particularly bad joke. "Just wait," Jake whispered back with a grin. "The best part is coming." The comedian was followed by a country music singer who had volunteered to entertain the troops. As the first notes of a slow ballad filled the tent, Jake stood up and extended his hand to Sarah. "Dance with me," he said simply. Sarah looked around at the tent full of soldiers and felt her cheeks flush. "Here? In front of everyone?" "Here. Now. Please." Sarah took his hand and let him lead her to a small area in front of the makeshift stage. Other couples were beginning to dance as well, soldiers with female personnel, some dancing with each other in the absence of female partners. The tent filled with the soft sound of boots shuffling on the dusty floor. Jake pulled Sarah close, and she rested her head against his chest. She could feel his heartbeat through his uniform, steady and strong. The chaos and danger of the past few days seemed far away as they moved slowly to the music. "Thank you," Sarah said softly. "For what?" "For making me feel normal again. For the past 2 days, I keep thinking about Rodriguez bleeding in my hands, about the sound of gunshots. But right now, I feel like a regular person again." Jake's arms tightened around her. "You're not a regular person, Sarah. What you did, most people could never do that." "Says the Navy SEAL." Sarah laughed quietly. "I'm trained for that. It's my job. You chose to run toward danger to help strangers. That's different." The song ended too soon, but Jake didn't immediately let go of her. For a moment, they stood there in each other's arms while the next performer was introduced. Sarah looked up at Jake and saw something in his eyes that made her breath catch. "Sarah," he began, but before he could continue, his radio crackled to life. "Commander Sullivan, report to command immediately." Jake closed his eyes and sighed. "I have to go." "I know," Sarah said, though disappointment was clear in her voice. "Tomorrow? Can I see you tomorrow?" Sarah nodded. "If you're not deployed somewhere." Jake's expression grew serious. "That's always a possibility. This life, it's complicated." Sarah touched his face gently. "I'm not asking for it to be simple." The next morning, Sarah threw herself into her medical work with renewed energy. She assisted in surgeries, treated injured soldiers, and helped train local medical personnel. But throughout the day, she found herself looking for Jake, hoping to catch a glimpse of him on the base. She didn't see him until late afternoon, when she was walking between buildings with a stack of medical supplies. Jake appeared beside her as if from nowhere, taking the heavy boxes from her arms without being asked. "Where are we going with these?" he asked. "Supply depot," Sarah replied, pleased that he had found her. "How did your meeting go?" Jake's expression darkened slightly. "I can't really discuss it, but we might be moving out soon. New mission." Sarah felt her heart sink. She had known this would happen, but she wasn't prepared for how much the thought of Jake leaving affected her. "How soon?" "Maybe a few days. Maybe tonight. I never know until the last minute." They walked in silence for a while, both thinking about what this meant. Sarah had 2 weeks left on her medical mission, and she had been looking forward to spending time with Jake. The possibility of him leaving so soon made her realize how much she was already coming to care for him. "Sarah," Jake said as they reached the supply depot, "I need to tell you something. I don't know what this is between us, but I've never felt anything like it before." Sarah set down her remaining supplies and turned to face him fully. "I feel it too. This life I lead, it's not fair to ask someone to wait. I could be deployed for months at a time. I could be sent anywhere in the world with a few hours' notice. I could—" He paused, unable to say the words. "You could be killed," Sarah finished for him. "I know what you do, Jake. I know the risks." Jake looked at her with surprise. Most women he had dated had wanted him to downplay the dangers of his job, to pretend that being a SEAL was just like any other career. Sarah's direct acknowledgement of the reality caught him off guard. "Doesn't that scare you?" he asked. Sarah considered her words carefully. "Of course it scares me. but not as much as the thought of missing out on something special because I was too afraid to try. Jake stared at her for a long moment, then pulled her into his arms and kissed her. It was their first kiss, and it was everything Sarah had imagined and more. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard. "I could fall in love with you," Jake said quietly. "I think I already am," Sarah replied. For the next 5 days, Sarah and Jake spent every free moment together. They would meet for early morning coffee before Sarah's shift started. Jake would find excuses to walk past the medical facility during the day. In the evenings, they would sit together and talk for hours about their dreams, their fears, their plans for the future. Jake told Sarah about his childhood in Montana, about losing his father in a car accident when he was 16, about his mother's struggle to keep their ranch running on her own. He explained how joining the Navy had been his way of making something of himself while serving his country. Sarah shared stories about growing up in a large Hispanic family in California, about her grandmother, who had taught her to be strong and independent, about her decision to become a nurse after her younger brother was hospitalized with leukemia. She talked about her dreams of eventually working with Doctors Without Borders or opening a clinic in an underserved community. "You want to save the world," Jake observed one evening as they sat outside the medical facility watching the sunset. "I want to make a difference," Sarah corrected. "Same as you." "We're more alike than I thought," Jake said, taking her hand in his. "How so?" "We both chose careers where we put other people's needs before our own. We both feel responsible for helping people who can't help themselves. We both signed up for jobs that are dangerous and demanding because we believe in something bigger than ourselves." Sarah squeezed his hand. "When you put it like that, we sound pretty crazy." Jake laughed. "Maybe we are. Maybe that's why this works." On the 6th day, Jake got his orders. He was being deployed to another location immediately. He had 2 hours to pack and prepare before leaving. Sarah was in surgery when word reached her. She was assisting with a procedure on a soldier who had stepped on an IED when one of the other nurses whispered that Commander Sullivan was looking for her. Sarah's hands never stopped moving, but her heart began racing. When the surgery was complete, Sarah found Jake waiting outside the operating room. His expression told her everything she needed to know. "How long?" she asked. "I can't say. At least a month, maybe longer." Sarah nodded, trying to keep her emotions in check. She had known this day would come, but she wasn't prepared for how much it would hurt. "Come here," Jake said, pulling her into a private corner. "I want you to know that these past few days have been the best of my life." "Mine too," Sarah said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I want to keep seeing you when we both get back to the States. I know it's complicated with me being stationed in Virginia and you living in Seattle, but I want to try." Sarah looked up at him with tears in her eyes. "I want that too." Jake reached into his pocket and pulled out a small object. It was a simple silver chain with his dog tags. "I want you to have these." Sarah stared at the dog tags. She knew what they meant, knew that soldiers only gave their dog tags to someone very special. "Jake, I can't take these." "Please," he said, fastening the chain around her neck. "I want you to have a part of me with you." The dog tags felt warm against Sarah's skin. She touched them gently, feeling the raised letters of Jake's name and service number. "I have something for you too," Sarah said. She reached under her shirt and pulled out a small silver cross necklace that her grandmother had given her. "This has been in my family for 3 generations. My grandmother told me to only give it to someone who would cherish it the way I do." Jake held the delicate cross in his large hands. "Sarah, this is too valuable." "Exactly," Sarah said, fastening it around his neck. "That's why I want you to have it, so you'll remember to come back to me." Jake kissed her then, pouring all of his feelings into that moment. When they broke apart, both had tears in their eyes. "I have to go," Jake said reluctantly. "I know." I'll email you every chance I get, and when you get back to Seattle, I'll call you every day. Promise? I promise. Sarah watched Jake walk away, his gear bag slung over his shoulder. He turned back once to look at her, and she waved. Then he was gone, and Sarah felt like a piece of her heart had gone with him. The remaining 10 days of Sarah's mission passed slowly. She threw herself into her work with even greater dedication, but every spare moment was filled with thoughts of Jake. She found herself constantly touching his dog tags through her shirt, wondering where he was and if he was safe. True to his word, Jake emailed her whenever he could. His messages were brief but warm, telling her about his mission in vague terms and asking about her work. He always ended his emails the same way. Stay safe. Miss you. Jay. Sarah would read each email multiple times, treasuring every word. She wrote back long letters telling him about her patients, about the local culture she was experiencing, about how much she missed him. She never knew if her emails reached him, but she kept writing anyway. When Sarah's medical mission finally ended, she felt a mixture of relief and sadness. She was eager to return home and begin the next phase of her relationship with Jake. But she was also leaving behind an experience that had changed her fundamentally. The scared young nurse who had arrived in Afghanistan 3 months ago was gone, replaced by a confident woman who had discovered strength she never knew she possessed. On her last night on the base, Sarah sat in her quarters, packing her few belongings. She held Jake's dog tags in her hands, feeling their weight. Tomorrow she would begin the long journey back to Seattle, back to her regular life. But nothing would ever be regular again. She had fallen in love with a man who lived in a world of constant danger, and somehow she was okay with that. The flight home was long and exhausting, but Sarah spent most of it staring out the window and thinking about Jake. She wondered where he was, if he was thinking about her, if he was safe. The cross she had given him seemed like such a small thing to protect him with. When Sarah finally arrived in Seattle, her family was waiting at the airport. Her parents, her 3 siblings, her grandmother, they all hugged her and cried and told her how proud they were of her. But even surrounded by the people she loved most, Sarah felt something missing. "You look different, Mija," her grandmother said as they drove home. "Stronger." "I feel different," Sarah admitted. "And there's sadness in your eyes." "A man?" Sarah's grandmother had always been able to read her like a book. "Yes, a soldier I met over there." "A good man?" Sarah touched the dog tags under her shirt. "The best man I've ever known." Her grandmother nodded knowingly. "Good men are worth waiting for, worth fighting for." That night, Sarah lay in her childhood bedroom staring at the ceiling. For 3 months, she had slept on a narrow military cot with the sounds of helicopters and distant gunfire in the background. Now she was in her comfortable bed in her quiet neighborhood, but she couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about Jake, wondering if he was safe, hoping that he was thinking about her too. 3 days after Sarah returned home, she received an email from Jake. She had been checking her computer obsessively, and when she saw his name in her inbox, her heart leapt. "Sarah," the email read, "I'm back at base but can't talk about where I've been. Your emails kept me sane during the mission. Every time things got tough, I would touch the cross you gave me and think about you. I meant what I said about wanting to see you when we're both home. I have leave coming up in 2 weeks. Would you like me to come to Seattle? I know it's crazy to travel across the country for a relationship that started in a war zone, but I can't stop thinking about you. Everything that matters to me seems to be wrapped up in a woman I've known for less than 2 weeks. If you feel the same way, say yes. If this all seems too crazy and too fast, I'll understand. Either way, you changed my life, and I'll never forget what you did for me and my men. Love, Jake." Sarah read the email 3 times, then immediately started typing her response. "Jake, yes. 1,000 times yes. I've been thinking about you every moment since you left. 2 weeks feels like forever, but I'll be here waiting. Come to Seattle. Come to me. Love, Sarah. She hit send before she could second-guess herself. Then she sat back in her chair and smiled for the first time since leaving Afghanistan. Jake was safe. He was coming to see her, and maybe, just maybe, this impossible love story actually had a chance. 2 weeks felt like an eternity to Sarah. She returned to work at Seattle General Hospital, but her colleagues immediately noticed a change in her. The quiet, somewhat shy nurse they had known before her deployment was gone, replaced by a confident woman who handled emergency situations with remarkable calm. Dr. Patricia Wells, the head of emergency medicine, pulled Sarah aside after her first week back. "I don't know what happened to you over there," Dr. Wells said, "but you've become an exceptional trauma nurse. Have you considered specializing in emergency medicine?" Sarah had been thinking about exactly that. Her experience in Afghanistan had shown her that she thrived under pressure and had a natural talent for crisis medicine, but her thoughts were dominated not by career plans, but by the countdown to Jake's arrival. She had told her family about Jake, though she had been vague about the details of how they met. Her mother was worried about her daughter getting involved with a military man, while her father was impressed that Sarah had found someone who served his country. Her grandmother, as usual, was the most practical. "Bring him to Sunday dinner," she had said simply. "I'll know if he's right for you within 5 minutes." Jake's plane landed on a rainy Thursday evening in November. Sarah stood at the arrival gate, her heart pounding so hard she was sure everyone around her could hear it. She had changed clothes 3 times and was still worried that she didn't look right. What if the connection they had felt in Afghanistan didn't translate to real life? What if they had nothing to talk about without the intensity of a war zone bringing them together? When Jake emerged from the jetway, all of Sarah's doubts disappeared. He was wearing civilian clothes, jeans and a navy sweater that made his eyes look even darker. But he still carried himself with the quiet confidence she remembered. When their eyes met across the crowded terminal, he smiled that same smile that had made her heart race in a tent on the other side of the world. Jake dropped his bag and pulled Sarah into his arms, lifting her off her feet and spinning her around. The kiss they shared was urgent and full of all the longing they had felt during their separation. When he finally set her down, both were breathing hard and grinning like teenagers. "You're really here?" Sarah said, touching his face to make sure he was real. "I'm really here," Jake confirmed, still holding her close. "And you're even more beautiful than I remembered." The drive to Sarah's apartment was filled with nervous chatter. They talked about his flight, about Seattle, about anything except the elephant in the room, whether the feelings they had developed in Afghanistan would survive in the real world. Sarah had cleaned her apartment 3 times in preparation for Jake's visit. It was a cozy 1-bedroom place in Capitol Hill with exposed brick walls and large windows overlooking the city. Jake looked around with genuine interest, examining her bookshelves and the photos of her family that covered one wall. "This is you," he said, stopping at a picture of Sarah graduating from nursing school. "You look so young." "That was only 3 years ago," Sarah laughed. "I feel like I've aged a decade since then." Jake's expression grew serious. "The person you were when we met in Afghanistan, that wasn't someone different. That was you under pressure, showing who you really are." That first evening together was awkward at first. They had dinner at a small Italian restaurant near Sarah's apartment, and conversation was stilted as they tried to figure out how to relate to each other outside of a war zone, but gradually they began to relax. Jake told her about his flight and about seeing the Pacific Northwest for the first time. Sarah shared stories about returning to work and readjusting to civilian life. "I keep waiting for something bad to happen," Sarah admitted over dessert. "Every loud noise makes me jump. Every time I hear a helicopter, I think about that day when you were wounded." Jake reached across the table and took her hand. "It's normal. It takes time to readjust. Some of my guys see counselors when they come back from deployment. Do you? Jake hesitated. I should probably, but I've been dealing with it by focusing on this trip, on seeing you again. That night, Sarah offered Jake the couch, but they ended up staying up until dawn talking on her small balcony, wrapped in blankets and drinking coffee. They talked about their families, their dreams, their fears about the future. As the sun rose over the Seattle skyline, Jake took Sarah's hand. This isn't going away, he said quietly. What I feel for you, it's not just adrenaline or battlefield romance. It's real. I know, Sarah replied. I feel it too. But how do we make this work? You're stationed across the country. You deploy for months at a time. I have a career here, a family here. Jake was quiet for a long moment. I don't know, he admitted. But I want to try. Do you? Sarah looked at this man who had already changed her life in so many ways. Yes, she said simply. I want to try. Jake's week in Seattle flew by. Sarah took time off work to show him around the city. They visited Pike Place Market, took the ferry to Bainbridge Island, and hiked in the Cascades. Jake met Sarah's family at the promised Sunday dinner, and her grandmother's verdict was swift and positive. That one's a keeper, she whispered to Sarah while they were cleaning dishes. He looks at you like you hung the moon. Jake charmed Sarah's parents with his respectful manner and his obvious devotion to their daughter. Her younger brothers were fascinated by his stories about SEAL training, though he kept the details appropriate for the family setting. By the end of the evening, even Sarah's mother had warmed to him. I can see why you fell for him, she told Sarah privately. But honey, this kind of life isn't easy. Military wives have to be strong. I am strong, Mama, Sarah replied. Afghanistan taught me that. The hardest part of Jake's visit was saying goodbye. They spent his last night together talking about their plans. Jake would return to Virginia and his SEAL team. Sarah would continue working in Seattle while they figured out their next steps. They would email daily and call whenever possible. Jake would try to visit again in a few months. I love you, Sarah, Jake said, as they stood in the airport terminal. I know it's crazy to say that after knowing each other for such a short time, but I do. I love your courage, your compassion, the way you make me feel like I can be a better man. I love you too, Sarah replied, tears streaming down her face. Come back to me safely, okay? Always, Jake promised. The next 8 months were the hardest of Sarah's life. She and Jake maintained their long-distance relationship through emails, phone calls, and text messages. They sent each other care packages and letters. Jake even managed to visit twice, once for a long weekend in February and again for a week in May. But the distance was brutal. There were days when Sarah didn't hear from Jake at all because he was on a mission. There were nights when she lay awake worried that something had happened to him. The uncertainty was exhausting. Sarah threw herself into her work, taking Dr. Wells up on her suggestion to specialize in emergency medicine. She enrolled in an advanced trauma certification program and took on extra shifts in the ER. Her colleagues noticed that she had become one of the best nurses in the department, always calm under pressure and exceptionally skilled with critical patients. You should consider medical school, Dr. Wells told her one day after Sarah had helped save a patient who had been in a severe car accident. You have the instincts of a doctor. The suggestion intrigued Sarah. She had always been focused on nursing, but her experiences in Afghanistan and in the trauma center had made her realize that she wanted to take on more responsibility, make bigger decisions about patient care. She began researching medical schools and taking prerequisite courses online. Meanwhile, Jake was facing his own challenges. His SEAL team was deployed twice during those 8 months, once to South America for a hostage rescue mission and once to Africa for a counter-terrorism operation. Each deployment lasted several weeks, and communication was limited to brief, heavily censored emails. During his time at base in Virginia, Jake found himself increasingly restless. He had always loved the adrenaline and challenge of being a SEAL, but now he found himself thinking more about the future. He was 32 years old and had been serving for 12 years. Many of his contemporaries were leaving the SEALs for civilian careers or transitioning to training roles. The breaking point came in September, almost a year after they had first met. Jake was deployed to Eastern Europe for what was supposed to be a 2-week mission. 3 weeks passed with no communication. Then 4 weeks. Sarah received a brief call from Jake's commanding officer, informing her that the mission had been extended indefinitely and that Jake would not be able to communicate for security reasons. For 6 weeks, Sarah heard nothing. She continued working, continued her medical school preparations, but inside she was dying. She had no way of knowing if Jake was alive or dead. The uncertainty nearly broke her. When Jake finally called, Sarah was working a night shift in the ER. She stepped into a supply closet to take the call, and when she heard his voice, she broke down completely. "I'm okay," Jake said immediately. "Sarah, I'm okay. I'm sorry you had to worry like that." "I thought you were dead," Sarah sobbed. "I thought I'd lost you and I didn't even know." Jake's heart broke hearing the pain in her voice. "Sarah, I'm so sorry. The mission got complicated and communication blackouts are part of the job, but I should have found a way to get word to you." "I can't do this anymore, Jake," Sarah said through her tears. "I can't live like this, never knowing if you're alive or dead. It's killing me." There was a long silence on the phone. Finally, Jake spoke. "I know. I've been thinking the same thing. This isn't fair to you." Sarah felt her heart sink. Was Jake breaking up with her? "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that I love you too much to keep putting you through this. I'm getting out, Sarah." "What?" "I'm not re-enlisting. My contract is up in 6 months and I'm not signing a new one. I want to marry you and I want to have a life with you, and that's not possible if I'm deployed half the time to places I can't even tell you about." Sarah was stunned. "Jake, you can't leave the SEALs because of me. It's your life, your career." "No, Sarah. You're my life. The SEALs were my life before I met you, but now I want something different. I want a home, a family, a future that doesn't involve wondering if I'm going to come back from every mission." "But what would you do? Being a SEAL is all you've known." Jake had been thinking about this for months. "I've been accepted to a training program for federal law enforcement, FBI specifically. It would use my military skills but keep me stateside. The pay is good, and I could be based anywhere in the country." "Including Seattle?" Sarah asked hopefully. "Especially Seattle. There's a field office there, and they're always looking for agents with my background." Sarah was crying again, but this time from relief and joy. "Are you sure about this? Really sure?" "I've never been more sure of anything in my life. Sarah Elizabeth Martinez, I want to spend the rest of my life with you. When I get back to the States, I want to move to Seattle. I want to meet your family properly. And I want to ask your father for permission to marry his daughter." "Yes," Sarah whispered. "Yes to all of it." Jake's transition out of the SEALs took 4 months. During that time, he visited Sarah 3 more times, and each visit convinced him more that he was making the right decision. He met Sarah's extended family, who welcomed him warmly. He explored Seattle and fell in love with the city. Most importantly, he and Sarah talked seriously about their future together. Sarah had been accepted to medical school at the University of Washington, and Jake was enthusiastic about her plans. "You're going to be an incredible doctor," he told her. "After what I saw you do in Afghanistan, I have no doubt about that." When Jake finally moved to Seattle permanently, it felt like the beginning of their real life together. He was accepted into the FBI training program at Quantico and would spend several months in Virginia for training. but then he would be permanently stationed in Seattle. Jake found an apartment near Sarah's, and they spent every free moment together. The transition from long-distance relationship to actually living in the same city was surprisingly smooth. They had spent so much time talking and getting to know each other during their separation that living together felt natural. 6 months after Jake moved to Seattle on a warm spring evening, he proposed. They were hiking in the Cascades at the same spot where they had hiked during his first visit to the city. Jake had planned an elaborate proposal, but when the moment came, he simply dropped to one knee and pulled out a ring. "Sarah," he said, "you saved my life in more ways than one. You made me brave enough to want a different kind of future. Will you marry me?" The ring was perfect. A simple solitaire that caught the light from the setting sun. Sarah looked at this man who had changed her entire life, who had shown her strength she never knew she possessed, who had been willing to change everything about his life to be with her. "Yes," she said, pulling him to his feet and kissing him. "Yes. Yes, yes." The wedding planning took 8 months. Sarah wanted a small ceremony, but between Jake's SEAL buddies and Sarah's large family, small quickly became medium-sized. They decided to have the ceremony at Sarah's family church, with the reception at a venue overlooking Puget Sound. Miguel Rodriguez, the SEAL whose life Sarah had saved, flew out to be Jake's best man. He was fully recovered and had been promoted to team leader. When he met Sarah again, he hugged her tightly. "I never got to properly thank you," he said. "My daughters are going to grow up because of what you did that day." "We saved each other," Sarah replied. "Your recovery gave me the confidence to believe I could be a good doctor." The night before the wedding, Sarah sat in her childhood bedroom surrounded by her bridesmaids, looking at the dress hanging on her closet door. It was a simple but elegant gown that her grandmother had helped her choose. "Are you nervous?" her sister Maria asked. "About marrying Jake?" "Not at all," Sarah replied. "About starting medical school next month? Terrified." Her grandmother, who was 85 and still sharp as a tack, patted Sarah's hand. "You were born to be a healer, mija. That man of yours saw it in you from the beginning. Now you're just making it official." The wedding day dawned clear and bright. Sarah woke up feeling a peace she had never experienced before. Everything in her life was falling into place exactly as it was supposed to. As she put on her wedding dress, Sarah fastened Jake's dog tags around her neck one more time. She had worn them every day since he gave them to her, and she planned to wear them for the rest of her life. Over the dog tags, she wore the silver cross that had belonged to her grandmother, the same cross she had given Jake during their first separation. The church was packed with family and friends. Jake's mother had flown in from Montana, along with several of his SEAL teammates who were like brothers to him. Sarah's entire extended family was there, 3 generations of Martinez women dabbing their eyes with tissues. When the music began and Sarah walked down the aisle on her father's arm, Jake felt his breath catch in his throat. She was radiant, glowing with happiness and confidence. The scared young woman he had met in a combat zone was gone, replaced by a strong, beautiful bride who was about to become a doctor and his wife. As Sarah approached the altar, Jake thought about the journey that had brought them to this moment. A chance meeting under fire had led to a love story that spanned continents and survived deployments and distance. They had both made sacrifices and life-changing decisions to be together, and now they were about to promise to love each other for the rest of their lives. Jake stood at the altar in his dress uniform, the silver cross Sarah had given him visible at his throat. Miguel Rodriguez stood beside him, along with 2 other SEAL teammates. Sarah's sister Maria was her maid of honor, and her 2 other sisters were bridesmaids. When Sarah reached the altar and her father placed her hand in Jake's, the minister began the ceremony. But Jake barely heard the words. He was looking into Sarah's eyes, remembering the first time he had seen her courage under fire, thinking about all the ways she had changed his life for the better. "Jake," the minister said. "Do you take Sarah to be your wife, to love and honor and protect her for all the days of your life?" Jake squeezed Sarah's hands and spoke in a clear, strong voice. "I do. I promise to love you, to support your dreams, to protect you always, and to be worthy of the courage you've shown me. I promise to be your partner in everything from here until forever." "Sarah," the minister continued, "do you take Jake to be your husband, to love and honor and cherish him for all the days of your life?" Sarah looked at this man who had been willing to change everything about his life to be with her, who had supported her dreams and encouraged her strength, who had shown her what real love looked like. "I do," she said, her voice strong and clear. "I promise to love you through every adventure, to support you in every challenge, to stand by you always. You showed me how brave I could be, and I promise to spend my life being brave enough to love you with everything I have." When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Jake kissed Sarah with all the passion and love he felt for this incredible woman who had saved his life in every way that mattered. The church erupted in applause as Mr. and Mrs. Jake Sullivan walked back down the aisle together, ready to begin the rest of their lives. At the reception, Miguel Rodriguez gave a toast that brought tears to everyone's eyes. "Jake and Sarah met under the worst possible circumstances," he said, "but they found the best possible love. Sarah saved my life that day in Afghanistan, but more than that, she saved Jake's soul. She showed him that love was worth fighting for, worth changing for, worth everything. They've both proven that real love can survive anything. Distance, danger, and even my terrible jokes." The room laughed. "To Jake and Sarah, may your love story continue to inspire us all." As they danced their first dance as husband and wife, Jake whispered in Sarah's ear, "No regrets?" Sarah smiled up at him. "Only that it took a war zone for us to find each other." "Maybe we needed all that fire to forge something strong enough to last forever," Jake replied. Sarah thought about the scared young nurse who had run toward danger to help strangers, about the moment when she had decided to risk everything for people she didn't know. That decision had led her to Jake, to this moment, to a love that had survived everything life had thrown at them. "Forever sounds perfect," she whispered back. As they swayed to the music, surrounded by everyone they loved, Jake and Sarah knew that their real adventure was just beginning. There would be challenges ahead: Sarah's medical school, Jake's new career with the FBI, the normal struggles of marriage and building a life together. But they had already proven that together they could overcome anything. Under fire, she had rescued the SEAL commander. Years later, he stood at the altar for her, ready to spend the rest of his life proving that her courage had been rewarded with a love worth fighting for.